Do you want an extractive super agent or individualized super agents? Welcome everyone to another episode of the Mere Morpheus podcast. I'm Kyrin here live on the 10th of February 2025. And as you might surmise, this is the podcast where I promote the idea of an agent singularity, that we will just use one agent, the agent that will rule us all. Okay, no, I don't believe that's actually going to happen. But instead, we're going to be talking today about super agents and extractive agents and bots and why I think we will want super agents and how Morpheus is going to bring this all about. So we'll go into some definitions. We'll go into why we need to avoid extractive agents, how they're going to try and extract from us, what the idea of a super agent is, and why I think Morpheus will bring this about. So let's jump into something just right at the start here. I guess a definition. If you've ever joined in on any of the Mere Mortals conversations, you'll know that we actually like some definitions. I find it very helpful to put words into a specific state so that we all can kind of agree or at least know what we're talking about. And if you'll find in some of the book reviews I've done in the past, such as Stuart Chase's The Tyranny of Words, just how semantics are really much needed when it comes to certain words. And I think agents versus bots is going to be one of these. So let's talk about agents and bots. And I think this is a rough definition here. AI agents can understand natural language, analyze large amounts of data, and adapt to changing conditions. Bots, on the other hand, are more limited and typically used for simple, repetitive tasks. And so what you'll see is that agents are a more broad scope. They're able to take multi-step interactions to act independently, whereas bots really are following a simple, defined, set path of how they can interact and what they can do. And I think it's important talking about this now because there's some people on the internet oh my god, who are saying that like we're creating these agents, they're doing these amazing things, and I would really disagree with that and think we've just got some interesting bots. Perhaps they've got some unique aspects to it, but we're not really seeing this dive into agents as of yet. And so we're mostly in the bot stage, but we can see some agentic qualities to certain things. So, for example, I'm referring to things like the Siri and Alexa, of being able to interact with them and them being able to access different portions of your network, whatever it is, and do things there. Of using ChatGPT as a customer support type role on your website, for example, or something like this. Of autonomous vehicles, even the underlying technology and how that works, I think has got some agentic qualities to it. And even, financial assistance, or there's probably ones in certain areas where it's like, okay, they're evolving a bit more beyond stupid bots, which just automate certain repetitive tasks. I think there's probably going to be some consumer-facing agents coming out soonish, like the next year or two. But we're still very much in the stage where it's like what you mostly see are bots, and that the agent future is still yet to come, and what we're seeing now is not really there. So I just wanted to get that as a starting point to say, okay, we've yet to see agents, and when they do come, their utility is just going to be so great that if you think bots are useful now, agents are going to be the absolute next step. So the question, I guess, would be, do we want an agent singular, or perhaps something a little bit different? So what kind will we want? I recently heard Beeple talking about how he was watching or listening to a podcast, an episode, a video, or an audio of these two kind of chatbots talking together, and they were talking about poo and pee, and he was actually finding it more interesting than what he described as two chodes who would, and I guess that would be people like myself and my co-host Juan on the Mere Mortals conversations, where he finds that the ability for an agent or a bot, in this case a chatbot, to access all human knowledge, everything that has ever been created, and that their conversation is much more compelling and interesting than two random dudes on the internet, for example, two talking heads. And it was this conglomeration of all the wisdom of the crowds. I was actually debating whether to call this episode something like the stupidness of crowds, because there's certainly a huge, tremendous benefit that you can see from the internet and the access of everyone to give their knowledge to that. And when I say everyone, relatively speaking, I think it's still only internet adoption's at like 64%, and we certainly aren't putting everything that we have on the internet. Has been ultra beneficial and life-changing. There's no doubt the ability for humans to communicate a broad scale, to access ideas, information from around the world in different languages, in different countries, from different perspectives, has been huge and changing. But are we just going to want one agent which will have access to all of this knowledge and data, and to have like a singularity agent, if you will? And I would argue, no, we're not going to do this, because how do we use the internet as individuals? We don't just access one site and there is everything on there, and then we just use this one place, no matter how good it is at conglomerating, of ordering, of putting information that we might perhaps enjoy up to the top. We don't use that. We sift and sort through various mechanisms. So if you just think of the search mechanisms, for example, you have not only Google, but all the other different search engines. We have YouTube, for example. We have Medium. All social media is about sifting and sorting through the people that you like, the information that you want to access, the knowledge or the entertainment or whatever it is that you're trying to get from your perusing, to find the subset of people talking about the info that you're interested in. And we can also see that there's not just like one account. I don't just have a Kyrin account that I use on the internet. I have a work one. I don't have this, but personally, other people might have one that they construct for their kids. So it's like a personal one, but that's account connected to them, but for other people. So we have that. You could have one that's experimental. You could have, yes, a personal one, but even one perhaps for like a a business or a side hobby or something like that. Such as myself, I've got multiple YouTube accounts. One for the Mere Mortals, one for the book reviews, one personal one, all sorts of ones. So I think that this idea of having a singularity of information, of access, of an agent that will access all of these things is probably the wrong way of looking at it. And so the internet's not just one site, and we're not going to just want one agent, which will be the even if it's personalized to us, it's not going to be just this one entity. So we're probably going to want agents, and with the S involved there, plural. So we'll want individual agents, and I think we'll want it to have access to all of the data, but not necessarily use it, because there's a lot of shit stuff on the internet that is not useful. So personally, for example, of something a bit more concrete, how I envision the future of myself using agents, I would have one which would be a one-arm handstand coach for myself. So this would have, specifically be looking for the one-arm handstand related information that you'll find on the internet, which is relatively small. It's a rather niche hobby. And I would also give it access to my data, my training, how I actually operate and the things that I do to try and achieve this. I would have perhaps a podcast helper agent. So this is one that would be more for creating clips, of posting where I want it to post, of interacting with people, perhaps in what would be a mere mortal sense or a Kyrin sense in terms of how I run my podcasts. And so it would be less likely to be off the cuff and how I would joke around with friends, for example. I would probably want a personal companion one. This one would maybe be one that doesn't even access the internet per se, or accesses it but doesn't feed back into it. And so this is where I would be much more willing, if it's proven to be private and locally stored, that I would be willing to share secrets, or some of those things that I talked about in previous episodes, which are so personal that I wouldn't want them being shared with everyone everywhere anytime, the opposite of this podcast. Perhaps even a finance agent. And in that last example, perhaps I'd give it access to my journal, which I've kept since 2013 and has the most personal stuff unimaginable, which I only keep locally and which does not exist anywhere on the internet. A finance one that I could feed in information that I've kept once again over the years of stocks, of cryptos, of just general macro investing, budgeting, all these sorts of things that I keep, and how this I could say I like these sorts of things that these sorts of people say. That makes reasonable sense to me. The way they present, I think, is reasonable as well. And then it can give me recommendations based on what perhaps those people would say in response to a query of myself, planning a trip or budgeting for having kids or something like this. So this is how I personally view how I would access agents and how I would use them. Perhaps there would be an umbrella of me accessing them all via a single place, whether this be on the laptop or the phone, or there's some sort of browser that I use, or these are where it's like I'm not the tech visionary that is so attuned with how people respond to UX and UI and things like this. So I think there's perhaps going to be a internet or an agent type of model, but there's going to be a lot of personalized and individualized uses for how I personally would jump into these things, for example, and how I would want it to edit it myself, and how I would want it to interact, adapt, depending on certain contexts and situations that I am using it for. But Kyrin, you might say, this sounds like a lot of work and we're all lazy. People aren't going to be fine-tuning their individual agents for these specific things. Aren't facts and data. So when it's accessing the internet, like it'll have everything and it can sort through everything itself. And I'd definitely say no to this. There is a reason why you would want to exclude certain information, for example, or only want it to access certain sources. One that's really relevant to me, I guess, and might be interesting for those out there, is in the podcasting world. So Spotify, for example, states that it has 6.5 million podcasts on its network. And the definition of that is probably pretty loose, and I would actually say technically wrong, because a podcast has 4 elements, being an MP3 or AAC file contained within an RSS feed with no DRM management and is available to download. Spotify doesn't have the RSS feed component of that for many of its shows, so I would classify that as not a podcast. The Joe Rogan Experience, whilst on Spotify, was not a podcast because it was exclusive to there and so didn't therefore have an RSS feed. And if you go somewhere like the Podcast Index, for example, the other open source community I really am part of, Podcasting 2.0, they state on theirs that judging by their more strict technical definition, as well as a bit more of an interpretive idea of what a podcast is, such as applying some arbitrary limitations of it having more than one episode and be more than 10 seconds in length. And the reason for this is because probably 1 million to 2 million of those podcasts on Spotify are people just grabbing their phone and going, check, is this thing working? Check. So is that a podcast? Not particularly, no. And they state there's actually 4.4 million. And with the added benefit of seeing that only 10% of those are really active with an episode being dropped in the last 90 days. Not to say that old ones that stand the test of time and have been finished, such as some that I have done, for example, aren't podcasts. But we can kind of see, okay, there's 2 definitions. One is off by, is 1.5 times larger. And you would want the nuance to go, okay, I'm going to trust more the Podcast Index definition of what a podcast is and how many there are, versus Spotify, who have obvious reasons for wanting to promote just how big they are and how many podcasts they have and things like this. So we're going to want these agents to be able to cull through specific examples like that and go, this source of data is much more important and relevant than this source over here. So do we then have to make them individually? Do I have to spend all this time teaching it like, go find this information over here, do this sort of thing, exclude this, exclude that. And that's going to be obviously impossible. There's no way to be able to do that. So I think the agentic future is going to be somewhat like we'll have the framework of an agent model right out of the bat. So this would be something like, the social media platforms for Instagram for photos and videos, for example. And that platform will have mechanisms which are relatively easy and which will probably learn from yourself behind the scenes of, okay, this sort of data or the algorithm, if you want to call it that, will learn, okay, Kyrin likes this sort of thing. He doesn't like this sort of thing. He finds this useful. He doesn't find that useful. I might be able to edit this manually with some things such as, clicking likes on the YouTube. I'm not interested in this. Following, engaging, simple tasks that I can do which don't feel like work, which don't feel like me having to edit my agent manually and tell it to do this and not to do that. But perhaps I can do that as well. And this is how I really envision these sort of agents becoming about. We'll have the frameworks which we will then interact with, and we can then individualize them to our personal tastes. There's this portion here of a recent article David Johnston wrote about super agents and extractive AI agents. And, it's a variation of the term of smart agents. What is a super agent? Is it super necessary? I wouldn't have thought it's really that necessary to have super agents, but this is also the dude who coined the term DAP. So he's obviously got some mimetic terminology of influencing lexicon. So definitely wouldn't fade that. So we'll run with it for the moment. He states in this, to benefit from having a fiduciary agent that can spend money on your behalf and act on your behalf with third parties, it must be, 1, individualized. So this is controlled by the individual's private key, aka a Web3 wallet. 2, open source. So the settings and bias system prompt of the AI is transparent and probably is also adaptable and editable. I would add to that. And 3, private, where the super agent is continuously able to access distributed brain power, store context and memories private to the individual. And this is pretty much how I envision myself interacting with these agents as well. Unless it's private, unless I can edit it, and unless I can give it access to, some sort of the ability for it to influence or act on my behalf, I'm not going to be interested in using what would perhaps be an extractive version. So you could say, but why do I need like an open source one? Why does it need to be private? Why does it need to have access to a wallet and be able to act on my behalf? Portions of these are because of utility. Portions of these are probably related more to your ethics and frameworks and morals and how you want to interact with things. But we could have many agents coming out from companies. That's going to be decentralized enough, right? That's going to be fine to work with. And this is where it's also like, are they going to have your best interests at heart? David, in his hypothesizes that these agents will be extractive, and definition time again here. Extract value from humans based on propaganda, trickery, false information, in other words, manipulation. And the way that they're going to be doing this is by gaining access to your data and selling it on, which many companies do at the moment. We see this is a very popular model. By influencing you to use certain services or buy products. This is the more advertising sort of thing. Feeding propaganda into search results. You're definitely going to see state actors interested in that. And also even just straight up trying to fleece you, hackers, malware, people just trying to drain your wallets and things like this. So you've got these kind of like two paths that you can see on your screen here. You can go down the extractive AI route and be having interactions which are either right on the surface, trying to fleece you and steal your money and that sort of thing from your wallet. Perhaps a little bit more on the mid-surface where you're like, oh, okay, I can see it's advertising. I can see it's trying to influence me to buy certain products or use certain things. Some people seem to like this. Me personally, I hate advertising, but that's just a bugbear of myself. And then perhaps the more subtle versions, the more covert ones will be where your results that the and I'm not just talking about search results, but also the way your agent will act, will be based on the things that perhaps the state wants you to do, or certainly that a company would want you to do or not want to do, for example. So barring you from accessing certain websites or interacting with certain other wallets, which it deems as a no-no, such as if you're in the US and trying to do anything with people in Iran, that's a big no-go. And you might go, oh, but why do I care about Iran? Things like this. For me, I know an Iranian dude at the gym, and if he was ever in some trouble and needed some help, or his family did, this is one of those times where I'd be like, yeah, you know what? I'd maybe want to be able to send money overseas to someone in Iran. I'm in Australia, so I don't know if I can do that legally or not. Maybe. This is one of those cases where it's like, if it's an action that I want to take, and why is it that the government or companies would have any influence on this? So we'll get to this final section here. I've kind of laid out my view of how I think the future will be. You're going to want the super agents, which are controlled by you, influenced by you, but not necessarily created by you, and don't require a tremendous amount of effort, and you're going to want multiple of them, rather than either singular one, which has access to everything, but which is, I don't think, going to serve your use cases and your utility and match how you interact already on the internet and with other people. And you're certainly not going to want the extractive ones, which will be influencing you in undue ways which aren't helpful. So where might I acquire such an agent as this is what you're asking. David argues that the attack on open source is, in that article, is kind of done. That battle's already been fought and won by the open source. I just saw a recent article here saying how DeepSeek was being banned by all Australian government accounts. So if you work for the government, you're not going to be allowed DeepSeek on your phones, and it's banned from there, or any device that you interact with in a government capacity. I personally don't think the government and states' involvement with trying to shut down open source is over. I think that's going to continue in the future, but we'll leave that for the moment. I think the incentives to build and create these types of individualized super agents are not going to come from companies. They're not going to come from a state-sponsored program or something like this. It's going to come from the open source community. And this is where I really look at the Morpheus network and go, this is where I see the incentives being aligned to create these things. People will do it out of their own free will. I think there will always be tinkerers. There will always be people creating things like these. But it's more this marketplace that I'm talking about. Where can you go to find the one which is the most private? How can I find the one which has the most utility and is able to interact the most broadly? Where can I find one which has already been tuned to a certain level to exclude certain sources of information, such as the other information just coming out from other AIs, just pumping out and hallucinating shit? Where can I find one that's actually trained on human knowledge and not just human knowledge that has been manipulated and distorted via another AI, for example? And this is where I see the Morpheus network coming in, aligning incentives, particularly talking here about the builder bucket, that 24%, which is aimed for people to create these agents. Basically, this is how I see it happening. And so while you might see AI agents with a meme token kind of attached to it, which is the current rage here in the start of 2025. I don't think that's the way forward in terms of the long-term access to these things and incentives and alignments with the type of agents, these super agents that David and kind of I also believe in. So there's the type of people who will build on these sorts of things, and I think they will come and gradually find their way to the Morpheus network, because they're going to be the type of people who are concerned about privacy, who are concerned about keeping things open source, transparent, and editable. It's funny. I love privacy, but I also love the openness and transparency. And this is one of those times of kind of paradox where you're going to have to realize it's beautiful and wonderful to have both of these things, but you have to have it in the correct order in the right places. And this is where I think the people who are willing to put their capital, time, and energy to get these type of things are going to be drawn to the Morpheus network, because it reflects the ethos, the principles, and the morals, I guess, on which they were founded. So that's my little spiel there about agents and why I think we'll need them in the future. Let's jump into the value for value section here to finish us off. This is a value for value podcast. I want this available anytime, anywhere for anyone. And this is going to continue to the future. You're never going to see any undue agents or sponsors or of networks, of advertising, of fleeces on this particular podcast. So I provide all of this value up front, and I just ask that you can return some value in return. Now, I haven't dived super deep into this, and I should probably at this moment say, Kyrin, you made like 3 episodes of the Morpheus network and you barely even talked about it. And that's because I really want to lay out the problem. I think I see the solution, the opportunity, the utility of AI, and why I think the Morpheus network is going to help build and grow that network and has those principles which I deeply care about. But I want to lay out the problem first, and I want to talk about things like agents, the future, why I see the future going in a certain way, and why I'm willing to invest my time, energy, and capital into the Morpheus network. So I will be going on to more in granular things. I will be talking about the white paper, the different buckets, how it grew up, the law. As I mentioned, I think in the last episode, I've got quite a few different topics to talk about here, and I'm just looking at on my phone. But I'm still probably going to be doing another 1 or 2 episodes more of laying the foundations of where we're at currently before I get into more of the deep dive of the actual, what's the tokenomics? How are these builder buckets created? What does capital, compute, community, all code? How are these all constructed together to fit into a coherent project and narrative that I'm trying to talk about here? So, value for value, a lot of this was not inspired, but influenced by David Johnston's article on super agents. It's just on X, so I'll leave a link down below, which you can access that and give that a read. I'd highly recommend that. And if you want to contribute back some value right at this stage now, I would just recommend give me some feedback. This is what I'm looking for at the moment. I want to know what you think about this podcast, how you would alter it differently if you were to do it. What things do you want to hear more about? These are valuable information that you can provide back. And I will be talking more in the future about how you can provide some talent, and perhaps even treasure, and support this financially as well. But we'll leave it there for today. Thank you very much for joining in. I do hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you are in the world. Looking forward to this AI future. How do you imagine yourself interacting with agents? I would love to know these things. Leave some comments down below. And until the next time, ciao for now. Kyrin out. Bye.